Charlie. Okay, good morning. Welcome to the Meeting the Communities Overview Committee. Just the normal housekeeping to go through first. I'm obliged to inform you the meeting's being live streamed and recorded. Can I ask you to ensure your mobile phones are switched off? I will go around and ask members and officers to introduce themselves, just for those that are watching online, so they know who everybody is. And then I'll also go to the people that are joining us remotely, just to confirm that they're here as well. So my name is Robert Macy. I'm councillor for Gebowen, Slash in Western Rin and chair of the committee. Christian?
Councillor Christian Lee, Shropshire councillor for Bridge North East and Astley Abbots.
Councillor Nick Barnsley, representing Brighton and Baschurch and substituting today for Councillor Mark Jones.
Okay.
Councillor Nick Ignott, Councillor for Ray Valley Ward and Vice Chair of this committee.
Councillor Dan Morris, representing Burnham Ward. Councillor David Bansler, substituting for Councillor Nigel Harsing today, representing Untitled.
Thank you. Julie?
Councillor Julian Dean from Portal.
Councillor Royal Croft Market Drayton East, just observing this morning.
Mark Barrow, Executive Director of Place.
Councillor Ed Potter, portfolio holder for economic growth, regeneration and planning.
Hey, Erin, both Programme and Strategy Manager, Shropshire Council. Shirley Davis, Committee Officer.
And Daniel Work, Screening Officer.
And then we've got a few people joining us online. Just by way of introducing, we've got a few extra faces online in terms of members, because we did at the last meeting say that we would extend an invitation to the Place Overview Committee because of the economic growth strategy, and there may be something in there they'd want to see on the briefing. So, but if I can ask those online to introduce themselves, I don't know which way we want to do that. Tracy, I can see.
Thank you. Tracy Dart, Assistant Director of Economy and Place. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got Joyce.
Yes, Joyce Barrow, Councillor and Chairman of Place Overview Committee.
Okay, Jeff.
Jeff Elner, Ellesmere Urban Member.
And now we're testing my eyesight. There's one more, but I can't.
No, that's everyone.
Is that everybody?
Yes.
Okay, right, perfect. Thank you very much. So I'll move on to item 1, which is apologies for absence and substitution. We've had apologies for absence from Nigel Hartin, and as said earlier, David Basmer is substituting for him, and also from Mark Jones, and Nick Barnsley is substituting today. Item 2 is disclosable pecuniary interests. Is there any members that need to declare? No? Okay. 3 is public question time. We haven't received any public questions. Item 4 is member question time. We have received 1 question. That's from Councillor Julian Dean. So I'll invite Julian to put his question, and then we have received a response to it.
Thank you very much. The council debt collection policy, adopted in 2016, was amended in January 2022, though that version is not yet on the council website at the time of writing the question, to recognise the decision to end 100% council tax support for the poorest households, but continue to allow for the use of enforcement agents, commonly known as bailiffs. Current regulations specify that if an individual misses one payment of council tax, they can become liable for the whole year's bill, meaning relatively small arrears can escalate rapidly. Research carried out by Money and Mental Health found that the action of creditors, including bailiffs, was a significant part of the causal pathway from financial difficulty to mental health problems. It has also been found that recovery from working people on very low incomes is costly and often not cost effective. So the question is, how many times have enforcement agents been used with regard to council tax arrears since the ending of 100% council tax support? How does this compare to the rate of use prior to that? And what data has been collected regarding the circumstances of those pursued in this way, either prior to enforcement or subsequent to it? Thank you.
Okay, we have received a response. I think Daniel's going to read it out on the person who's prepared the response's behalf. It is a little bit lengthy, so members will have to bear with us.
Thank you, Chair. Although the Council introduced a 20% minimum payment for working age council tax support claimants with effect from 2018 to 2019, in 2020 and 2020 to 21 and 2021 to 22, the Council also awarded a £200 council tax hardship discount to all working age council tax support claimants. This removed over 1,000 working age council tax support claimants from paying any council tax at all for those financial years. The Council has continued to support working age council tax support claimants with council tax in 2022 to 2023 with a £50 hardship payment. The Council's council tax support scheme also still supports vulnerable groups and continues to offer 100% council tax support to those groups. Claimants or partners that meet the criteria for the severe disablement premium are protected from the minimum payment, as are those awarded the support component of employment support allowance or its equivalent in universal credit. As a result, all working age council tax support claimants have received additional support over and above the council tax support scheme in the previous 3 years. It was expected that the introduction of the minimum payment would initially impact on collection rates negatively, but that collection rate would improve again over 3 to 4 years. The initial impact of the minimum payment was not at the scale predicted, and the impact of COVID in 2020 to 2021 was greater. The Council's recovery team always tries to assist all debtors who are struggling with their council tax payments. This is clearly set out in the debt collection policy. The team also works closely with advice agencies such as Citizens Advice, and we have regular meetings with Citizens Advice. We have to comply with the legislation, and this stipulates that where any debtor misses an instalment and fails to bring the payment up to date following receipt of a reminder notice, then the whole balance for the financial year becomes due and payable. All of our documentation signposts the debtor to where they can go for the independent financial advice and support. Where a debtor has an attachable benefit or is working, the team will always try to apply for an attachment to benefit earnings rather than pass to an enforcement agent. Cases only progress to enforcement agents where the debtor has failed to engage or if we can't attach income or benefit. Where any cases are passed to our enforcement agents, they always send out a pre-compliance letter to all debtors prior to moving to compliance stage. And if there is any contact from the debtor, they are referred back to the council. Unfortunately, in cases where the debtor fails to engage, either with the council or the enforcement agent, then the enforcement agent will make further contact and the debt will go into compliance. The enforcement agents also have a welfare team that can provide advice and support for claimants. We have regular meetings with our enforcement agents in order to monitor their activity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So obviously, Julian, we'll get you a written copy of the response as well. Oh, you've had it through now. Okay. That's fine.
You want supplementary?
Go on, I'll take one.
Thank you. Just for a little bit of context, members, the original question did not refer to the fact that the policy had changed, because I looked on the internet and found the most recent one, which unfortunately was the 2016 one. That may have had an impact on getting an answer to my question, I'm not sure, but I have to say that I haven't had an answer to my question. The specific question was how many times have enforcement agents been used, and we're not told. The specific question was how does that compare to before we reduced the support, and we're not told. And the specific question was about the circumstances of those people where enforcement is used. On the flow chart on the policy, it very clearly makes it, it does make it very clear that enforcement is a last result. It's in a different colour. I would have thought, given that we would actually know the story of how often it is being used and what the circumstances of those people are. And it's just a little bit shocking that that we don't have that data to hand. So I will effectively ask the question again, I'm afraid.
I think we could take that away and feed that back from ourselves to the officers as well to try and chase up those actual figures for you. So, but thank you. We'll take that away. Okay, moving on. Just one thing, just prior to the meeting, I'd received the apologies from Councillor Ted Clark. His apologies, they were so late. So if we can note those into the minutes, please. Item 5 is the Economic Growth Strategy 2022 to 2027. Members of the committee will remember Hayley did a presentation for us at our last meeting. We asked to be kept informed and updated as the process proceeds. So that's why we put it on the agenda for today's meeting. So I will hand over to Hayley at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I think Daniel's just sharing my slides. Oh.
Just one note to the committee that the lag on this is considerable and can take up to 20 seconds. So if there are any awkward silences or lags, I'm afraid it's the technology rather than us. So please bear with us.
You say that.
Daniel, I think they're not my slides.
I'm not sure that's a technology problem. It probably is.
Sorry.
Nice.
One moment.
I've got so many strategic plans. We've got many on the go there.
And even though you're a well-versed officer, that probably talks to that as well.
It's
So,
a bit of a go, but you know.
Bear with me one moment.
no problem.
Chair, while Dan's doing that, would you like me to just give a very quick kind of backdrop introduction?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's helpful. I think it's useful for members to kind of just reflect on the timing for this couldn't be better. We were due to replace our economic strategy anyway, but in the face of the pandemic and the recession economically that's followed that, I think most people are revisiting their economic strategies anyway. So this is very much of the moment in that sense. I think it's helpful to reflect on the fact that at the beginning of the pandemic, Shropshire actually was hit amongst the hardest. The information we've got from the East and West Midlands is that our job centres saw the second highest increase in unemployment as a percentage across the whole of the East and West Midlands, which is a reflection on our economy. Pre-pandemic, we had just over 4,000 people unemployed. That peaked at about 9,000. It's dropped back to about 5.5. So we're amongst the fastest recovering, but our unemployment levels are still a good 1,500 people more than they were pre-pandemic. In terms of universal credit, we entered the recession with 9,000 people on universal credit. That peaked at 21,000. And that's only dropped back to 19,000 people. So there's clearly some kind of dynamics underway out there. And yet our work with employers locally is showing there are real kind of shortages of people and skills in certain sectors. So this strategy will land at the right time for the local employment base. There's been lots of engagement with representatives of employer groups. And Hayley's going to, as soon as that slide, I'm running out without hesitation, repetition, or deviation, to kind of struggle with this. But that's kind of very much the space that this is landing in, Chair.
Yeah, do go with me. It is the right one, and it is shown on my screen as.
I can see on Daniel's. That's so good to catch up.
No, it's failed. Hold on a moment.
It's moments like this that make you realise how smooth technology has been at meetings up until.
IT doing the best. Here we go.
There you go. Okay, over to you, Hayley.
Thank you. That's great. So yeah, as Chair said, we came in March to talk through where we were in terms of the economic strategy at that point. And since March, a huge amount of work has continued on that, and we're now at the point where we're able to share with you the structure, the overall structure, and the majority of the content of that now, which we will then be looking to refine. And I'll take you through a timeline as part of this slide deck. So next one, if possible, thank you. I'll start talking before it comes up. So this is about the journey to the strategy. So as Mark said, we have the Economic Recovery Task Force, which I talked to you about last time, which has met since 2020. And we've also had a subgroup which has been working and supporting particularly the development of the economic growth strategy, which has been invaluable really to ensure that this has, as we talked last time, sort of business fingerprints all over it as it develops, and this really reflects what the whole business community, partners and stakeholders wish to include in that. We took feedback from the last session, which was very helpful around zero carbon, which we have included a member of the Zero Carbon Task Force, Zero Carbon Shropshire into the task force going forward now, and we'll pick up a little bit more on that after. We held a business stakeholder workshop in person with 70 people and 50 online. That's still available to view. We did a member update via a newsletter in December last year, and we came to yourselves in March 22 this year. We've also had another task force workshop and senior officers of Shropshire Council facilitated by the University around the logic model work. So that took place earlier this year. We held a second member briefing a couple of weeks ago, which is available to view online for those members who couldn't be able to attend that session as well. And then obviously at the point now where we're back talking to yourselves through the current state of play with the strategy. It's okay, don't worry, it's obviously not playing ball, is it?
No, it isn't. Just hold on 5 minutes. I might have to just transfer this to somebody else to do it.
Try and do that.
I'm sharing that, Daniel. Elijah. Does that work, Chair? Yeah. Yep, much better. Good. Okay.
Thank you. So this was really about the evidence and work we've done to date. So we've been working on the detailed evidence base with our insight team, and that will be ready to go out shortly. We had feedback from the business and stakeholders, which has helped build the themes and asks. We've undertaken a SWOT analysis, and we asked members who came to the session to be involved in that as well when we had the workshop in November. We've been working on a logic model to identify appropriate vision and impact, and that's been a really valuable kind of conversation and piece of work, which I'll touch upon later in the slides. And we did the review of the achievements of the previous economic strategy. So I've talked to you about those before, but these will all be available as appendices to the strategy. Thanks, Mark. So what does the refresh look like? Again, we talked about this in terms of the key themes: supporting local business, strategic location, and employment and skills. So moving on, we're now looking at what's next for Shropshire. So the world has changed, as Mark talked before, with new opportunities and challenges. We've had that sort of restart and revitalised economy through the recovery grants and the economic task force. So we're now looking at that sort of preemptive confidence response born out from our economic performance over the last 4 years and necessary to sort of start that growth of our economy. And this strategy sort of acknowledges that the funding landscape has changed alongside the mechanisms for allocation as well. So as we talked about, and as members will be aware, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and how that will look for Shropshire. And it's really important in terms of timing, as Mark alluded. We're in a really good position where we are with our strategy at the moment, and the work that we'll be doing around our action plan to support what will be the investment plan for UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And I think what we're hoping to be very clear in this strategy is, what is it we must achieve, what public sector interventions and commercial investment is sought for, so we have clear kind of strands and clear actions and priorities within the strategy. And I think what the last 2 years has really shown us, and we've talked at length around, is the sort of innovative responses we've had to the pandemic from private, public and voluntary sectors, and the coming together through the task force for the betterment of the county. So that's been some real strengths in our strategy. So we're able to sort of share with you our proposed vision for the economic strategy now, which we've been working with the university to help develop, and we've tested through the subgroup of the task force. And that's looking, you can read this, but I'll speak about it. It's around working together with our businesses, communities and stakeholders, and by utilising our unique environment and high quality assets, we will co-create a connected, competitive and inclusive economy, one that's nationally recognised, where businesses and residents are thriving, healthy and resilient. And we've tested that with the task force, and we're keen to hear thoughts on that. It's really trying to sort of establish where Shropshire is, where we want to go, looking, building on our kind of great environment, but actually I think we've got to be bold and saying, connection was such a key element that came out through all the conversations we've had, connected in terms of infrastructure, connected digitally, connecting people, connecting businesses, so that was a really loud sort of voice that we heard through the kind of development of the strategy. Being competitive, and I think being bold about that, not being afraid to say we are competitive, we want to be different, we want to be competing up there with other areas in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And an inclusive economy is clearly hugely important, especially coming through this now. So and what we've done is taken that sort of vision and looking at sort of mission statements that support those three themes when we talk about local business, strategic locations and employment skills. So aims of the strategy, providing appropriate housing, connectivity, networks and workplace progression through training and upskilling, so the county has the right workforce to enable economic growth and prosperity and grow its working age population, which is no surprise to members to hear how important that will be for our economy going forward. Provide the right tools and support to facilitate businesses to invest in research and development, relocate to Shropshire, expand and grow in their physical locations and workforce. And champion investment in wider infrastructure that underpins business investment around town centres, high street, business parks and growth corridors. So they're high-level missions that we look to kind of ensure that that's what we're aiming for throughout all of the actions that we'll start to develop for the strategy. I just wanted to sort of show you this around the logic model work that we've done. I hope it's important that you can, and I think you'll see the journey that we've been on. I appreciate those boxes are quite small and I can't read them from back here, so we can always share these around with you. But the red one is around inputs, the green one is around activities, moving on to outputs, outcomes and impact. And the work that we've done has been really valuable in ensuring that what we're putting in there is around our resources that will enable us to then progress to our activities. The activities will be the work we develop through our action plan work. So we've started looking at some high level activity streams, and clearly then we're talking about what outputs we expect to achieve and importantly the outcomes. But through the development of this, we've started at the end. What impact are we trying to achieve? Because if we don't know what impact we're trying to achieve, everything else we do is insignificant, because we don't know what we're trying to get out from the strategy, then everything else has no, there's no line and no flow of that. So that's been a really valuable piece of work, which has really shaped up how we take this forward, and has been really well received from our stakeholders and partners, because they can see actually, we can all be very busy in the activities because we're good at getting on with things, but actually if we're not measuring those and we're not reviewing them effectively, how do we know if we're achieving what we said we would at the start? And fundamentally then, how do we adapt our strategy and our actions to ensure that we do achieve that impact? So the logic model, which is quite huge, that sits behind it and won't be a part of the formal strategy, is really important for us as officers, but also for members to understand that journey that this strategy is going through. So, and if you like strategy, like me, you'll love things like that. So, moving on. So the strategic theme, just to remind members, supporting local businesses, locations, employment skills, and those cross-cutting values around inclusivity, resilience, sustainability, and well-being and health. So the next bit we talked a little bit about last time is around the governance. So we will have one. We're looking to move this forward. That the strength of the task force and the role that's played has been really supportive and really, I think, helped in terms of our recovery and our bounce back as Shropshire. But actually ongoing, a lot of the stakeholders have found the value in that conversation, and I think thinking around the Shared Prosperity Fund, and also really importantly, as I just talked, around the governance and the management and the overview and the holding to account of our strategy, we need a forum to be able to do that. And this isn't just, as I've talked before, about a Shropshire Council plan. This is Shropshire's economic strategy. So actually we need those partners around the table so we can all have those honest conversations about how things are developing, what we need to be lobbying hard on, what we might need to change, what investment we might need to put into different areas collectively. Otherwise what we say and the impact we're trying to achieve won't happen. So we're looking at, we're working with the university a little bit around this as well, is how we get to the sort of the right space in terms of governance to support the strategy going forward, and some of those funding streams as well, with the sort of whole economic landscape nationally changing, as members are aware. So that's a really important piece that we get right, and we sort of develop collectively through the strategy. So this was just to give you an overview of some of the impacts and KPIs we're starting to develop. So this is sort of an example, obviously, because we're working on these in more detail, but it's around the impact, the metrics we're going to be looking at, the source of that, obviously having the baselines fundamental, and then what are we targeting. So an example is improved productivity. So we'll be looking at GVA per hours worked, and gathering that via OS, so it's reliable data. And the baseline is Shropshire 26% less than the national average in 2019. So our target would be to close the gap to the national average by at least 50%. And I think we had some interesting feedback when we tested this with partners, was around the language that we use, and I think we've changed some of our thinking around closing the gap to the national average by at least 50%, because sometimes the language we can use within the council can almost seem where we're just trying to, I think it can sound negative in terms of our targets at times, and actually what we're saying is, we want those to sound and be positive in how they're received, because they're not always perhaps interpretable to the public or to businesses perhaps. So that has been really interesting feedback. So that's just some examples of the sort of impacts and KPIs we'll be setting as part of the strategy development going forward. Next one. So in terms of the action planning, through this, at this point in the strategy, what we're intending to do is put some high-level key actions within the strategy. And as I'll come on to shortly, we'll be then developing up the action plan over the summer period, which will then have more detail about those key sort of actions and activities we wish to take forward. So we'll be looking to sort of continue and strengthen our comprehensive business support services, building on the strengths of the established provision and providing agile support, network clustering opportunities and grant solutions in partnership reflecting those business needs. Support Shropshire's key sectors to target key areas of strength, expanding our supply chain opportunities, and target cross-sector development and diversification, and targeting and nurturing high growth potential. and looking at investment plans based on strategic locations. And then we'll be looking at, through our strategic locations, we've got supporting these by ensuring businesses are invested into their localities and adding community value to our active involvement in placemaking, delivering housing and employment opportunity for targeted investment locations, place-based approach within market towns, including affordable housing and physical sustainable infrastructure and employment sites. So that's all around a whole place approach to our kind of requirements and needs in our towns and our areas, and how that all needs to come together through the conversations we've had, for example, with our affordable housing colleagues, and ensuring that, you know, we're marrying up their requirements and the work they're doing there, how we support that through skills requirements, how we support that through infrastructure delivery, and I think that's a really strong kind of strength that we can have through this strategy. Bringing forward our employment land in strategic locations in line with the local plan or identified local need, championing sustainable development and environmental resilience through flooding, water quality, climate change, etc., and exploring opportunities for investment to the quality of public realm and natural and built environments to enhance the sense of place. So that's it's quite a lot within strategic locations because it covers a huge sort of area of opportunity, really. Key actions for our employment and skills is around continuing mapping and addressing our skills gaps by working with the community and voluntary sectors, continue to work with schools, colleges and business to develop and retain young talent along increasing employment engagement and the uptake of apprenticeships in SMEs, develop and deliver opportunities for retraining and upskilling of the workforce, including reskilling and the development of transferable skills. And again, this was mentioned in scrutiny last time, and also through conversations that we've had around some of those areas where perhaps we're not able to deliver against some things we wish. For example, retrofitting, which members mentioned last time. Naturally, it's about having the right people coming through, the right courses available. So it's all that conversation with the colleges, with the schools, linking into the businesses and the developers, and ensuring we're kind of coordinated in that approach. And I think, you know, we've got to get better at that, I think, through this strategy. Support initiatives to improve employability and basic skill provision within the workplace, and working with training providers to meet skills needs of business community. Thank you. So the last slide really is to set out the next steps for the strategy. So we're intending to go to Cabinet in June to ask for approval to go out for consultation on the high-level strategy, which I've talked through the process today. We will then be collating comments and review. We'll also be developing the action plan to accompany the strategy, the end of the strategy for the end of the summer this year. So the action plan is where a lot of the detail and the conversations that we're having with our partners will take place to really decide what are those actions that we want to hold this strategy to, and how we will measure those, and how we'll review and look continually sort of check and balance against those. And that's fundamental, and I think really well aligns with our shared prosperity investment plan, which is due to government by the 1st of August this year. So developing those together, and I think there's a huge amount of value in that. They should talk to each other incredibly closely. There should be slightly different things within the action plan because that will have a wider remit as well, but actually the development of this times particularly well. And then the intention is to go back to Cabinet in October this year with the action plan and the developed strategy, which will hopefully, all being well, be adopted by our partner stakeholders and everybody, so that we're in a good, strong position to take this forward into 2023. So I have sort of tried to rattle through those slides. I think that's all from me, unless anyone else wants to come in.
Mark or Ed, is there anything you want to say? Sorry, Ed, you really are in a position I can't see.
I just suppose from my point of view, I think the next important thing is the consultation. and obviously for public consultation, but also for members to engage. So at the event we held at the football ground, we had group leaders and scrutiny chairs were invited. The economic task forces has been integral to this. So I think when we go out to consultation, it'd be really important that all members engage in this, because of course you know your areas of the county probably best than anyone else. You know the businesses in your patches. So I think that's, from our perspective, that's the key thing in the next phase, is to get this out to consultation and then sort of bring in that feedback. And I think members are going to be absolutely integral to that. So it's just a bit of an ask for people to do that.
Okay, and I'm assuming members will receive when it actually goes live, little things like that to make it easy for them to share on and help and so on in that case.
Yeah, we've scheduled into the consultation to hold a workshop for members during that period specifically, so that was the intention.
Okay, no problem. I suppose one thing just from the offset with mine is you mentioned sort of the logic process, I'm going to say. Is it
Logic model, but yes.
Model,
yes.
close. But obviously you started from the point of going backwards and impact. I'd probably say from our perspective as a scrutiny panel, probably the same starting point would be for us once it's been out for consultation. If it's something that is going to proceed on the timetable you talked about, I just wonder, is there a good thing in meeting with us as a committee and agreeing how that will map out, certainly over the 3 years that the life of this council goes, and just having a agreed approach as to what we're looking to be an impact on as a committee, and certainly when it will come back to us, what we're looking to do, etc., etc. Does that make some sense? Is that something we could put in?
Yeah, I'm okay to come back on that. I think what we had to put into the last paper, and I think would be really valuable, is around how we get the timing of coming back to scrutiny for review, and we can use the governance to do the check and balance, but report that back to scrutiny for kind of review, question, challenge. I think that would be really valuable.
Okay, I think Daniel's just said Tracy would like to come in and comment. So
thank you, Chair. Just really quickly, just to say that as well as the consultation exercise that we want to and need to do with the document, we also need to move at pace as well, because what's really important is that we're seen as, you know, as a council, as sort of leaders in the economic space, and we really need to get the strategy over the line, which can then be continually reviewed through the action plan anyway. So it's an evolving thing. You know, the economy has changed, you know, dramatically in just the last 2 years. So, you know, and it will change again in the next 2 years and the next 2 years. So we need to be fleet of foot, but we also need to sort of push on and get the strategy over the line as well. It needs to be right for Shropshire, but it needs to be, you know, get to a point where we can then start delivering it, which is really important. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Members, open up to yourselves. Dan?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask perhaps the Deputy Leader or perhaps Mark, just how important the sort of major sort of strategic investments that the council is making or proposed to making. The report goes on and talks about the importance of infrastructure and growth corridors, and I just wondered, you know, what you know, the importance of things like the North West Relief Road and Mile End Roundabout and that sort of thing, and how important that is to the sort of this strategy document, really.
Yeah, so in all the feedback that we've had, particularly in the engagement with businesses and our partners across the county, those key infrastructure projects are absolutely essential. We know, particularly for driving growth, particularly around Mile End, and the interest in these projects and is not insubstantial. We see this at the Mile End and the interest around the innovation park. Of businesses that are looking to expand from the Oswestry area, but also businesses that we could potentially lose out of Shropshire because they haven't got the area or the capacity to grow within their current premises, and as well as attracting in businesses to the county as well. Likewise, when we look at, for example, the Shrewsbury Town Centre regeneration projects there, significant interest in what is a very exciting element for the county town, which we know will have an economic benefit for Shropshire, as well as Shrewsbury as a town in itself. It's not been unnoticed by myself that whenever some information is released through the council around the next stages of development, I get a huge number of interested parties contact me, which I'm able to pass on to the relevant officers around interest in that. And of course, connectivity is one of the key factors that has come out of us on this refresh so far. And that connectivity takes many forms. Yes, in terms of broadband, is one of the essential things, but also we know that the networks in Shropshire and connectivity along Pacific Corridor, so things like the North West Relief Road, the A5, the A49, A53, all those roads and the highway network are important to businesses and growth and attracting investment into Shropshire. We've got to remember that in terms of on the strategic highway network, this is where many of the many businesses want to be situated in terms of easy access. And of course, it not only has an impact for us as a county, but it also has wider benefits to our neighbours, particularly in Mid Wales. And we are in conversation with partners across the border in Kpis around the links around transport, particularly, and the economic synergies that we have between us, but also into North Wales and the West Midlands and through into the other areas which are covered by the Marches left. So you're looking at sort of Herefordshire, Telford and Wrekin, and of course the wider West Midlands within which we sit. So I don't think that those projects can be underestimated, and the importance of connectivity is certainly something that is coming out loud and clear from talking to businesses right across Shropshire.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Dan, is there anything you want to come back on?
Yeah, if I could just follow up. I noted in the report that productivity in Shropshire is 26% below national figures. So I wondered, how sort of connectivity with broadband and key infrastructure and growth corridors, presumably that's an important part of bringing that figure down as well. Perhaps Ed could comment on that as well, please.
I'll just hand over to Mark on that because he's got a little bit more detail on those specific figures.
Thank you, Chair. What drives that figure really is the kind of nature of the employment base. And one of the things that we want to do to lift GBA is increase, if you like, the added value elements of employment as well. So building on, for example, that cluster of digital technologies that are kind of growing in and around Shropshire, what we've seen through the pandemic is actually a huge, and you'll see it in members in your individual wards, a huge influx of people that now don't need to be kind of based in cities. They, work is what we do, it's not a place, using this kind of technology. Interestingly, in the first 2 quarters of 2020, Shrewsbury saw, this is according to the Estates Gazette's kind of, review of all of its members, Shrewsbury for the first 6 months of 2020 saw the biggest increase in office inquiries in the whole of the UK, which is an astonishing, achievement for a place such as Shrewsbury, who's not necessarily seen as the centre of the office market. So there's a big shift that's going underway in terms of people making these quality of life decisions and people in business deciding where they want to be located. So there's a bit about how do we get into that space? How do we kind of maximise that opportunity for Shrewsbury and for Shropshire as a whole? And that speaks to the skills agenda, it speaks to the kind of spaces that we've got, collaborative office type space. We're looking at WeWork type models at the moment. We're trying to accelerate our business park development programme and land more and more employment in the county in different places. So the broadband bit is essential. As you'll know, we're about 96-97% covered by super fast broadband. But actually that's moving on, isn't it? It's now about 5G and it's now about big gigabit connections. So if we think of the investment in highway infrastructure and broadband as connectivity to the economy, that's what we're really kind of maxing out. So Shropshire becomes a competitive place to base any business, if we think of it like that. So the skills part of this economic strategy will really then kind of augment where we want to get to with growing those sectors that will give us that additional employment. Now the other bit then is how do we lift the base? How do we lift that cohort of people that are in and around minimum wage employment? how do we professionalise things like, the care sector and the health sector and those kind of things? Because, actually top 3 jobs advertised in our job centres are both care and health related employment. There's a real kind of surge in that world at the moment. So we're working at all levels, I guess, is the response to that. So that we can kind of maximise those added value bits, but we make sure that kind of no one's left behind. So it's a real kind of spectrum of kind of activity in that sense. The physical connectivity bit beyond kind of the digital is, there are corridors of growth. There is still a need to relate to cities, such as Birmingham and Manchester and Liverpool, and there's kind of centres of connection there. So we're also really kind of focusing on, how do we make sure the train service is as good as it can be? How do we make sure people are as connected as they can be? The estimate, for example, of the Riverside development at Shrewsbury is it will create an additional 2,000 new jobs. That's really important. But also the construction process will create quite a few hundred new jobs as well. So let's not forget that too. So we're working at kind of all levels on this, in a genuine sense. Now, the really important bit to land here is, does our business community recognise it? Are we kind of in the realms of possibility, and do they think they can deliver it? And the answer so far is yes. They think that this is sensible. They've helped contribute to what you've seen in Hayley's presentation. So we're travelling forward with a bit of confidence, if you like. But what it will require is for people to align their resources around it. We're going to require the colleges to invest in the skills that we need. For example, we're going to need businesses to invest in some of the other bits of essential infrastructure. And of course, there's the green kind of, everyone talks about the green and digital recovery. There's a green element to this too, and we're working on that as well, so that people can be competitive in that sense too.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. David, am I right just to see if Julian's questions related directly to it and then come to you? I haven't forgotten. Sorry, Chair, can I just add a bit to that? Is that all right? Yes. Yeah, that's fine. Just picking up on the skills thing as well, I think, yes, around the colleges particularly. But I think in terms of some of the things that we need to be looking at here is, particularly through our enterprise work, is getting Shropshire businesses, and there's really exciting, innovative businesses in Shropshire into schools at a young age to inspire our young people that actually Shropshire can provide highly skilled, highly paid employment opportunities within our own counties, so that we don't lose our young people to the bright lights. And I know there will be an element of young people wanting to move away from Shropshire to perhaps find employment in London and Manchester and the bright light cities, but actually Shropshire, by gearing our economy, particularly with an influx of new businesses, particularly around sort of tech, we have a real opportunity here to inspire our young people. I think we need to ensure that those businesses that are out there that are going to be looking to recruit look to homegrown as well. And it's one of the things that we've done, particularly across the People's Director, in terms of growing our own and to fulfil things such as social workers. We're going to have to look to do this here in Shropshire, and I attended a business launch for Beaver Bridges on Friday, which is a really success story for Shropshire, doing some fantastic engineering works. And if we could get, and the managing director of that business was really inspiring when he spoke about his company and how they sort of started in 2016 with 6 employees and now employing 90 employees. We need to get those people, I know they're busy, but out into our schools and colleges to inspire the next generation as well. So I think the piece around skills is going to be really essential in this, and it's something that's sometimes overlooked within economic strategies, but it's probably one of the key things that will really come out of it. Right, I'm just conscious. Julian, was your question just directly in relation to this bit, or
some general comments? Actually, Councillor Bassett had his hand up before I did.
I was going to say, in that case, I'll come to Councillor Bassett first.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm not a regular member of this committee. I'm a substitute, so something that I might say might be overtaken or considered in previous meetings. But my feeling, having read this report, was it was very, very light. There wasn't much, in fact, there were references in 6.4, I think, to a significant amount of work being done, and 6.8 further work. And quite clearly, that work has been, is around, obviously, and has been referenced in the presentation. And if we are a scrutiny committee, I think we need more information than we've got in the report we've got before us today. I think there is clearly much more details being done, and no doubt some of them are very, very good. And I don't question it. But if we are to scrutinise it properly, it's impossible to do that if you're suddenly presented with a lot of detail in the meeting itself. For example, I'd be very interested in the KPIs which are being developed. Clearly, any policy needs to be reviewed, and if a scrutiny committee is to do its job, it needs to be aware of the KPIs, and it needs to be able to kind of talk about those, be involved in their creation, and then be involved obviously in their review. So I was very disappointed that there was nothing much about that in the report, and I do feel that that the outcomes are so important. If we are to have effective policies, we need to be able to review them and be involved in the making of them. I was talking to Councillor Kerr before this meeting started about how I felt sometimes like a spectator in these meetings, that there's too much time spent on officer reports and presentations, and not enough time, not enough information given to us beforehand, enough time then to scrutinise the information that's presented to us. So, I don't doubt some of the policies here are very good, and the emphasis on retrofit, for example, and the need for to look at the new situation which we face. But I'd like more information about how we're going to deal with it, how we're going to benefit from, for example, people able to work from home, and to people who want to set up businesses locally and want to move to somewhere like Shrewsbury. That's welcomed, and we need to develop that. But I do feel we just need more information. If we have to do our job as a scrutiny committee, we need to have more information beforehand.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if any of the officers want to. I think from my point of view, I was taking this as this would be the overarching aims. The next steps would be we would see the sort of the key performance indicators, etc. But I go back to that point of I think there's probably a need just to sit down with the committee, probably at an informal meeting, and just agree how we want to look at it going forward, and then take that point. But I'll hand over to Hayley.
Thank you. Yeah, just to come back on that, the one I put in there was just to give an example of how those are developing up, so I take that on board. And what we're doing with the action plan, we need to develop those in partnership with others as well, in terms of ensuring that we're putting the right KPIs in. So that's what we're doing over the summer. More than happy to, and I think it's the right, I take the point on board to come back and share that in whatever forum the committee wish to see it. I think, the action plan is where we'll be really sort of putting that detail together. The purpose of this strategy at this level is to enable us to have a framework to work from, develop up the action plan in partnership, so that we all understand and we all own those outputs, and I think that's really important. Thank you.
Okay, just trying to think who I have next on my list. I think it was probably Julian, if you'd like to just come in.
Thank you very much. I'll start by repeating what I said in the online workshop, which is with the LTP, with the local transport plan, we've shifted from predict and provide to a vision. We need to have a modal shift. We have a purpose, and I just don't feel that we're doing that with the economic strategy. It still feels to me like we have a neutral view on what growth is, without really determining where we want growth, what sort of growth is good and what sort of growth is bad. And it's a little bit concerning that the impacts that we're seeing so far are very neutral: productivity, wage rates. I would like to see impacts that are around the scale of renewable energy in the area, the decarbonisation of the SME sector so that it's sustainable for the future as well as for homes, the decarbonisation of heating. Although those are the vision that it seems to me that is still missing. It's interesting that the word sustainable isn't actually in the vision statement at the moment. And a little bit of context about that. Last week we saw at Cabinet the Integrated Care System Green Plan. That's a real opportunity, although it was weak. It's a real opportunity because it starts to talk about using procurement, and the NHS local procurement is going to be huge. Alongside us, it's probably one of the two biggest. To begin to really shape the local economy and to green the local economy, and that's what I mean by vision. So it just feels to me like we still don't have a mission. in this, which apart from growth, which is a very neutral term and which can be quite a damaging term. So I think that's my overall concern. The only other comment I'll make about connectivity, I was at that workshop at the football ground with the businesses. Actually, the connectivity they were asking for wasn't the North West Road, it was buses to Bishop's Castle, so care workers who can live in cheaper housing can get to work. You know, so that's we haven't mentioned it today, but actually public transport connectivity was absolutely central to what many of those businesses were saying, and I think that we need to have that central to our understanding of connectivity, and we need to be honest about how far we can develop that.
I'm going to come to Nick Barnsley next. I was just going to say, Joyce and Jeff, obviously we've asked you to come along and listen and so on, so if at any point you do want to just indicate, and we'll have to take the comments of how this will cross over into place as well. So Nick.
Thank you, Robert. I'd just say that the members of your committee have asked some really good questions, and a couple I would have asked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joyce.
Can I
I'll
just
say it as well, just then okay, go on, Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just back up very strongly a point that Councillor Potter made just now, and emphasise how important it is to be talking to schools and colleges. I'm afraid there is still a culture within the education sector that academic, university, etc. is good, and anything else is fit only for the less able, frankly, less talented children. And that discourages our school leavers, not all of whom, of course, are academic, not all of whom will benefit from university. And yet there are fabulous opportunities in the care sector, of course. I can speak with personal knowledge, and Councillor Potter can as well, about the hospitality, catering, travel, visitor economy. And it is extraordinarily difficult to recruit people into that sector when the whole culture of our education institutions can be extraordinarily negative, and think, oh well, not very bright, yet they can go into the care sector, not very bright, they can go into somebody's kitchen. The fact is, if you are involved directly in that sector, as Ed Potter is and as I am, there are fabulous opportunities, but the schools and colleges, I fear as well, can actually be a barrier to young people who might otherwise see the opportunities. If you look at an economy not a million miles away from here, again, which I know well, and that's the Republic of Ireland, they encourage youngsters from a very young age indeed, right the way through their school years, to get involved in, to understand, and indeed to look forward to being part of the visitor economy. And it is no surprise to me at all that visitors from all over the world will land up in Ireland because they're so good at it. They don't come in the same numbers to England, they don't come to Wales, they don't come even to Scotland, because frankly we're not very good at it. And part of the reason is that in Ireland, very young children understand that visitors, hospitality, catering are all key parts of the future of the country they live in. We don't do that. Indeed, we rather tend to do the opposite. We tend to say, oh, well, if you go and work in somebody's restaurant, it's because you're not bright enough to do a better job. And that is a real shame. And, sorry to bang on about it, but Ed is so right. We need to get successful people from hospitality and catering, from people working in hotels or whatever, people working successfully in the care sector who have progressed up and are now managers in or whatever in residential homes or nursing homes, to say what a great job it is, and and if you don't do that, then we're going to carry on only thinking that the less able youngsters will go into those sectors. So I think there's a big cultural shift that needs to take place, not just in Shropshire, but let's start where we live.
Okay, thank you, Nick. I don't know if any of the officers want to come back on that. I assume that's feeding in, but it's trying to reassurance it is.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Yeah, it is. We talk about sticky students, but actually the opportunities on apprenticeships are huge. And when you talk to people in the colleges groups, both Shrewsbury College, North and South Shropshire, they're seeing huge interest and growth in that kind of activity. So what we're looking to do with the school community is grow those opportunities across the spectrum, and that's really what I was trying to say earlier in terms of that end-to-end process. So reassurance to everybody that we're looking at completely. And if I can share, as I've just got the microphone, in terms of Councillor Dean's point around, where does green fit into this, and that green supply chain of skills also is really important. In our cross-cutting values, we've got inclusivity, so that again covers Councillor Bardley's point. This is about how we get inclusive growth, both rural and urban, higher value, lower value employment. How are we more resilient? And in the context of climate, that's also now about energy security as much as it is about values, but sustainability is also called out as one of those. And just as a reassurance, we've spent a lot of time with the private sector colleagues talking about the green supply chain and how we want to grow that, and how Shropshire businesses can be more competitive. And it's helpful to reflect on the fact that Shropshire is the second biggest generator of renewables in the country as a council. There's groups out there that kind of recognise that. So we're coming from a strong base, would be what I'm saying. But if we can develop more skills and supply chain activity in that, then that creates an economic advantage for Shropshire too. So all of those things are central to our thinking.
Okay, I'm just going to bring in Tracy and see if she's indicated it, and then I'll come to
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things in terms of responses of points that have been raised. So, first of all, the councillor that says it feels like he's sort of a bit of a passenger in this. We never stop receiving information, so there is not a point where we're saying now this is fixed, so you've got to wait until the consultation's available. My officers will receive information, any suggestions or ideas or input that any member wants to make to the strategy. They've only got to just email us and let us know their thoughts and ideas. We're not guaranteeing that everybody's ideas, because it's impossible to have everyone's in a strategy, but it will help shape and formulate the strategy going forward, because nothing's fixed yet. So it's an open invitation to any ideas or suggestions, and it doesn't have to be till we get to the next scrutiny meeting for that to happen. In terms of the Councillor Dean talking about modal shift and connectivity, I mean, that's right at the heart of this strategy. And my officers, not only in Hayley's team, but also Chris Taylor and the wider economic team, look at connectivity and modal shift and work with colleagues in highways and transportation, strategic transport, around how that again can be part of economic growth. Some of the connectivity issue is about just getting people to a neutral position, and that's what growth is. Some people have no broadband connectivity at all, so how do we get to them to the point where they can, and then they can get jobs, so that's what growth is also about. It's not just growth building things, it's about how we grow our communities so that they can interact. And then in terms of the types of jobs, and Mark's talked about that as well, but we have we also have lots of discussions with our partners. So, for example, you know, meetings we've had at Harper Adams about them trying to get people into jobs around agritech, and that whole point about people see agritech as, you know, sitting on a tractor in a field, and it's completely different these days. You know, the whole industry around IT and how they're developing automation is massive, and there's a whole different world of types of jobs out there, jobs that have only just been created that you know, children can grow into and develop. And then also, just as a point, and I spoke to one of the directors of Balfour Beatty the other day, and he was talking about trying to get jobs into the construction industry. Again, very similar point to Harper Adams about people think it's about, you know, bricklaying and, you know, and roof tiling. It isn't. And he said that, you know, an example is that, you know, they offer a school leaver a salary of around 25,000, and they'll pay for them to go to university so that they can develop them in their business, and they can't get people interested. So, you know, again, our strategy is how do we get that information spread wider, and how can we get into schools and colleges to encourage people to go down these opportunity routes, which, you know, isn't always about university, which I think is the point that was raised. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Duncan, next.
Yeah, you know, it's obviously an important topic, and there was some very interesting and useful data, slightly alarming data on universal credit claimants, but some interesting data coming out. I think my point is that this isn't a static area, though. Clearly, every other council in the county is going to also be involved in an economic development strategy, and equally going to be working hard to try and improve its economy. I suspect the ones that succeed in this process will be ones that have a clear vision as to the type of jobs they wish to be known for. Clearly, there's going to be a wide range of jobs across Shropshire, but what I didn't get out of strategy was a clarity about, in 5 years' time, 7 years' time, whatever, Shropshire will be known as a hub, as a great place for these types of businesses. The reasons for that is you can work out with your supply chains, businesses that want to work in partnership for businesses are attracted by that, your training providers can gear up for that, and everything can fall in line behind that. Clearly, from my perspective, I love that vision, that business type to be on the retrofitting of energy or green energy, but it doesn't matter if it was medical or if it's high tech. I'm worried about there not being a clarity about what Shropshire will be known for as an employer in 7 years' time. And if I take an example, Innovation Park, great to have an Innovation Park on the outskirts of Oswestry, an innovation for what type of business? It's left completely blank. We apparently welcome any sort of business. It's sort of I don't know, sort of make of it what you will. I think it would attract a far higher degree, in particular, a higher paid employment, which I think is a big issue, the north of the county in particular. It's the quality and the grade of jobs. If that had been identified as particularly appropriate for, and there could have been medical, high tech, you know, again, I'm not really trying to peddle a particular business component, but I am saying I think there's a significant shortfall in not having identified that clearly as a headline within the strategy. And again, I'm going to say again, I'm not saying that everything else is irrelevant. Yes, it's clearly relevant. We clearly have jobs right across the piece. But you know what Cambridgeshire is known for. We know what many areas of the county are known for. If this is successful, I'd want us to know what Shropshire is known for in 7 years' time.
Okay. Would any of the officers like to have a response to that?
Yes, Chair. I think firstly, a reassurance that we have a lot of detailed kind of evidence of the makeup of Shropshire's economy in terms of where jobs are, what kind of sectors they're in. But I think also one of the things that we've been talking kind of with businesses in terms of conferences that we've had and the workshops is the mega trends that are underway, and we've been looking at things like the rise of automation and talking this through with businesses. And when you look at all the research from World Bank, Bank of England, McKinsey's, all those sorts of people, you know, by 2040, the predictions are something like 47% of all jobs will be fundamentally changed. We've seen a massive shift in an acceleration in the way, you know, people operate and the businesses operate through what the pandemic has caused. But we also know that over 95% of new jobs will come from existing local employers. So there's a bit about where are our strengths, how do we get behind those key sectors that we've got at the moment, how do we help those businesses become more successful. We've got pretty good startup rates actually for new businesses in Shropshire. There's a focus then on how do we help those people survive. We've got 32,500 of our 150,000 people in employment are self-employed. So there's a bit of a how do we put in place, if you like, the microclimate that supports those businesses to grow from being self-employed to being, micros and then SMEs. So there's a raft of kind of, if you like, that rather than specific goals is an environment that we put in place. In terms of what will we be known for, that's kind of part of that overall narrative, I think, which will come out in the next phase, which is kind of, let's call it our key sectors. What are the key sectors? If we're going to have a conversation with government about investment programs in the future, what's that kind of, that classic kind of elevator pitch? So, that's kind of part of what will feature in the action plan. But just to reassure you, we've got a lot of work in that space. We do understand the economy. We've been working with business groups like Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Business, the NFU, all the big representative groups of business in the county to kind of help shape that. So, just a reassurance, Chair, that kind of sense of key sectors will be part of the final strategy.
I suppose just one related point to that, I just want to check. So we talked about upskilling and professionalising some of the industries and so on, and if it's saying sort of 95% of the growth will come from existing ones, do we think the two marry up as such? If we're expanding those, is there enough potential within them to professionalise some of those, to raise those wage levels and so on at this point?
Yes, I think so, Chair. I mean, it's all about where you sit in the value chain, in that supply chain sense. So that's kind of one of the things that we want to do, is position Shropshire business in the best way, in the best markets. Global business is changing. Everything around Ukraine is changing the way that people are thinking about global supply chains and thinking about self-sustainability. The whole energy security bit now has a different meaning to most businesses. So, all of that stuff is in the mix in this strategy, Chair. And what the economic strategy will do is it will knit with the Shropshire plan, it will knit with the local plan, it will knit with our housing strategies, it will knit with the local transport plan. It is one of those key enabler kind of top line documents that we will have, not just for the council, but for the county as a whole. So, what we hope to do is, people own what they have built. By getting everyone in our economy engaged in developing the strategy, then everybody can hopefully get behind it.
David?
Yeah, just one, you've mentioned, Mark mentioned the increase in energy costs which many businesses are facing now, and surely this must be a threat to some businesses within the county. And I wondered, to what extent you're reviewing the economic strategy to take account of the increased energy costs and the threat that may bring to the survival of some companies, and to larger companies that have offshoots here may think about kind of moving to countries which have lower energy costs.
Councillor Basman's right, it's a critical issue for a lot of business. For example, we've already started talking to a range of business groups and representatives of business groups around things like the potential for green hydrogen. We have an aspiration to be a centre for green hydrogen. Huge potential, for example, for the agricultural sector, huge potential for all of those big yellow construction equipment, kind of, whether it's civil engineering, whether it's construction, whether it's quarrying, actually bus operators, freight operators, everyone can kind of see that that's ripe as an opportunity for us to kind of move towards. So we're looking at, is there a business plan for Shropshire to become the centre of a green hydrogen production facility? Members will know that we're bringing forward things like the proposition in Maysbury on that former tip site to bring forward a solar array. that sits on a private network that actually supports, you know, local businesses in that area on a private network. You know, when we're looking at how can we bring forward more of those. So it's absolutely a key and central part, I think, Councillor Lassmer, of our future strategy is that whole position. And actually, if we get it right, it could give us a competitive advantage.
Sorry, apologies, Chair, I had to leave.
Sorry, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to go back to the report 6.4. It mentions about future governance and management suggests the Economic Investment Board could potentially evolve into, sorry, let's get it right. The Economic Task Force could potentially evolve into an Economic Investment Board. And just want to know if there's any more details on that. For instance, who might be sitting on this Economic Investment Board? What sort of powers would it have? I presume the aims and objectives would be the same as the task force, but I just wonder if other councils have already done this and whether there are big advantages to forming an economic investment board.
Okay.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question around the governance piece, which we're working on to establish. There's a few things I suppose I was talking about in terms of holding the strategy to account, but also thinking around UK shared prosperity funding and how we manage and facilitate that. So at this point in time, the membership isn't confirmed, and actually in terms of this strategy, we're working with the university around a kind of a process we need to go through rather to establish that board or group. That's a term, it might be called something else, it's just to give a context that at the moment we don't have a sort of private sector involvement in terms of overview of our economic growth, and where we can take conversations through, we can talk about the strategy, we also can manage budgets and funding and money collectively. And I think in order to make the strategy work more effectively and other things that we're intending to do, to have that, as Mark said, buy-in and involvement from everybody in our projects and our work streams going forward, that's going to be essential to the success of this. So this strategy at this point will set out how we could go through a process of setting something up, and whatever that may look like in terms of the economic landscape as well, where we're evolving with LEPs, where we're evolving with other sort of existing platforms. So the task force, I think, has been quite strong in its sort of vocal, you know, and a task force by its nature is a task force, so it has to end at some point because it's set up to do particular things. However, the value and the strength of the work of the task force, they are keen to continue to have that kind of opportunity. And we've also been talking to the business board around what they intend to do in the future and the role that they would like to play. So there's some conversations, I think, to be had in that space to develop up what that could look like. This is something that is quite common in other authorities, just to give that assurance. It's something that I've worked with before. I'm sure Tracy and Mark both have, where you have a partnership sort of space. I think it's important to understand what decisions will be made where, and if it's more of a sounding sort of board, and if there's any financial contributions that will be made from funding, etc. So that's all sort of still at play at the moment, I would say.
Okay, okay. Yep. Sorry, Mark.
Can I just build on that, Chair? Because part of the question was who's involved. I think it's so interestingly, in terms of the Economic Task Force leader, portfolio holder involved with that, but also representatives from opposition groups as well have been attending. So that sense of, you know, common purpose, you know, what's best for Shropshire is very much kind of part of that future structure. And the other bit to recognise is that we work as part of March's LEP at the moment, along with Telford and Wrekin and Herefordshire. Within the governance framework, the government wants to see around levelling up. You know, there is a question around what is the long-term future of LEP. So just, I think part of that answer is that's still under review, and we're working with partners to understand that in more detail. But what's really been valued by Shropshire businesses is sitting with Shropshire members actually and decision makers as they see it. So I think what Hayley's pointed to there, Chair, is the mainstreaming of that task force into some enduring partnership that's public and private, and does have people like academia and some other sectors representing it as well. So I think there's a commitment there to carry on with that mode of an inclusive kind of body that will work together.
Christian.
Yes, following on from what Councillor Barnsley said earlier on when he spoke about the importance of local business leaders and businesses getting out to local schools, promoting the opportunities for young people. I do feel that it'd be a good idea perhaps to get some young people who are in these types of employment which Nick referred to, such as the hospitality and catering, talking about the opportunities that have come their way and how they're progressing up the career ladder. It would then, encourage youngsters at school perhaps to consider these types of employment at the same county.
And that's maybe something we can consider, is giving a bit of a spotlight for people to come and do that, and then, as you say, it's something that could be shared out with schools and so on, or worked on. But it's a couple of you, I think, would probably volunteer for helping with that sort of work. So yeah, okay. I haven't got any other hands up for questions. I'm happy we've examined this at this stage, and I think there's a clear thing of this will come back. There's going to be a lot of work over the summer. Our next meeting is the 20th of July. Just taking that, obviously we've got annual council in between this, so, but if the members are happy at the moment, I think what we'd say is we want to look at this again. It might be that there's a pre-meeting or some pre-work to be done to make sure we've got the information we want for the next meeting, and then bring that forward. But other than that, I mean, reflecting the views, I think there's been some challenge around specific areas that will probably come forward in the next part of the process you've outlined. But as you say, it's an important thing for the whole of Shropshire, for all of those, and for the future of Shropshire. So yeah, we look forward to it coming back again. Thank you. Okay, with that, I will move on to work programme review, which is over to Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. I've been busily trying to sort of refresh my computer in the background and back up, so hopefully the lag won't be quite so bad this time. Ordinarily, I present you with just a work programme with a table of the forthcoming items for future meetings. You may remember that programme is now running its course as we get to the end of the municipal year. Obviously, our next meeting in July will be a fresh municipal year, so it might be a good opportunity for us to review our work to date, look at our remits, take advantage of some of the work that's been done to strengthen the council's strategic framework, and to start to explore some ideas of where we'd like the committee to go in the next year. So, with that in mind, I was going to go through, first of all, quickly trot through your official remit. We'll talk about your real remit, as in the remit that you've generally been landed with day to day. Have a look at the priorities. Explore very briefly, or list some of the current strategies and plans that are in place. Look at what you've agreed to look at in the previous year, and then hand it over to you to start to discuss what you'd like to do in the year ahead. This is your current remit, according to the Constitution. I won't read through it. Some of this will look very familiar to you, and it should provide some reassurance that at least you are, and have done in previous years, covered some of the elements that you've been tasked with. I think you've pretty much looked at all of that, apart from perhaps working with town parish councils over the previous 2 years. However, as has been mentioned before, the committee remits, the overview and scrutiny committee remits for Shropshire Council could probably do with a bit of a refresh anyway to reflect some of the emerging topics and priorities for the council going forward. But in the spirit of flexible working, obviously you have taken on some extra responsibilities in order to balance workloads. So obviously you've taken charge of scrutinising the economic growth strategy and then the housing strategy, and this committee has also touched upon the climate change strategy in recent years as well, though in no great detail. I think one of the criticisms of the council from members has been previously a lack of a strategic framework on which it hangs its overall work, and obviously the council has responded to that and put quite a bit of work in the previous year into developing the Shropshire plan. This is the council's corporate plan, the overarching plan that we used to look at our focus, our vision and strategic goals for the council for the next 3 years. You've probably seen this before anyway if you've been to some of the workshops around strategic plans. So again, I'll just send these slides over to you after I finish this presentation. Obviously, as you know, though, the strategic plan is the overarching document, but underneath that there's all sorts of work that would actually be very useful for this committee in terms of informing itself when these topics do come to scrutiny. Not only is there the strategic plans, there will be delivery plans, as Hayley alluded to earlier. The economic growth strategy is underpinned by an action plan, which is probably going to be of more interest to you in terms of your work than the strategy itself. There's work underway to develop a performance management framework for the entire local authority and to place that online. So rather than waiting for officers to give you the information that officers think that you should have, that information will be available online for you whenever you want to look at it, to empower you to be able to find out the information that you need to inform your scrutiny going forward. And then, of course, finally underpinning that is the financial strategy, which is usually led through the council's financial strategy task and finish group, but then again comes through scrutiny through the performance management framework. I've taken the opportunity to have a look through this Shropshire plan as it stands at the moment and pull out some of the objectives from that plan which might be of interest to you in terms of your remit going forward. We talked earlier today about the developing Shropshire as a vibrant destination, and indeed we focused as well on the visitor economy and how we might develop that. Also, in your previous meeting, you might remember that we started to explore the council's housing policies in their various forms, and it was noted at that meeting as well that the council's work around housing is quite disparate across separate directorates, and doesn't always necessarily pull in one direction, although obviously there is considerable work in place to try and bring some unity to that work. And then again, that might be something that the committee wishes to explore or focus on in the year ahead. These are some of the objectives within the plan. Again, I won't read these through to you, but these again might provide you with some idea of the things that you might want to look at going forward. And again, some of these have been touched upon today in terms of green space, footpaths, cycleways, highways, the nature of the mix of different transport types that we use. And as Julian alluded to earlier, the need to develop community and public transport options. One of the other objectives, one of the main 3 objectives of the plan is healthy environment. And again, there are several objectives within here that fall within the remit of this committee, particularly around corporate climate change, licensing, enforcement, community safety, some of the bread and butter work of the local authority, which is of vital importance, of course, in terms of creating desirable communities in which Shropshire residents might live. And again, within that healthy environment is the need to tackle climate change and the carbon footprint. And as you can see here, again, there's some opportunities here for where the committee wishes to focus its work going forward, particularly around biodiversity, renewable technologies, as Mark mentioned earlier, and household waste and recycling, which I know that some of these committee members have asked to bring to this committee previously. And then finally, the healthy organisation. Again, this is probably more suited to the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee, but there are two objectives in there which I thought might be useful or interesting to you, particularly around sort of families and community, and around where services sit and how we signpost to those. I think this is particularly relevant to the chair, because I know that we've long mooted a piece of work around strengthening communities and how we work with town and parish councils to do that. And it's a theme that crops up repeatedly in Shropshire scrutiny meetings, the way that the council works with town and parish councils to deliver services and the best mix in doing that. particularly around youth work, around community centres, around how communities can support themselves where services can't be delivered to rural areas effectively, like ambulances, around winter gritting, all sorts of stuff there. And I think rather than looking at these issues piecemeal, it might well be that this committee can add value by looking at the whole topic in the round. And so again, those are some of the underlying objectives that sit within these broad themes. The Shropshire Plan lists 4 plans and strategies that are currently in place. And again, some of these have fallen within this committee previously. The Community and Rural Strategy came to this committee late 2021, I believe. The Climate Strategy has come to this committee as well. Cultural Strategy is yet to do so, but certainly Housing Strategy in various forms has as well. I would suggest that whilst looking at strategies can be useful, what might be of more interest to this committee is to start looking at some of the service plans and the action plans that are meant to deliver some of these objectives. And I think that's where you could be really useful in ensuring that what the council devotes in terms of its resources, its staff, its money, matches the ambition of what it's trying to achieve within the Shropshire Plan. I've also taken an opportunity as well to look at what you previously agreed to look at again, not necessarily with any specificity, but really just to receive an update on how officers are proceeding with the work. You've agreed to, for example, to look at the domestic abuse strategy, which has yet to be published. You've agreed to sort of review the Armed Forces Covenant. You've agreed again to sort of look at developing housing strategy, working with town and parish councils. Gillian, Councillor Dean alluded earlier to buses and community transport. And again, this is a topic that the committee has looked at repeatedly. We were not back, unfortunately, recently for the Bus VAT Better funding from local government, sorry, from central government. So the committee may wish to look at how the council's going to respond and continue to deliver improved bus services without that additional funding. And then finally, at your previous meeting, that you agreed that you would track and monitor development of support for blue badge applications. So there's a lot there, but there are some very broad strategic themes around climate change and around housing and around economic growth. There's a broader topic there around working with town and parish councils to deliver optimised services, and there are some smaller but no less relevant topics that lightly peppered across a work programme might add a little bit of variety rather than getting bogged down into one topic. So with that in mind, it's over to you really. It's your work programme. You drive this, you deliver this, so it has to be you that decides where to go with it.
Okay, well the good thing is there's plenty to go at. I don't think we're short on work, and obviously a lot of this we discussed previously. We've got to do sort of in concert with the place committee as well, because there is a lot of crossover. Obviously Daniel's done a great summary of what we've got available to us under our current remit and what we've already committed to. I suppose it's about how we lay that out, how we're effective, what we're looking to actually impact on. I'm probably going to suggest we take comments now, and we can take some broad brush comments and so on. I think probably as well, we probably need, as previously discussed at a meeting, probably an informal meeting of the committee and its substitutes as well to really get into it and move this around, and then we can bring it back ready for our next meeting with a bit of focus for this. But I'm quite happy to open it up now for initial thoughts or where we want to set. Okay, Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. 2 or 3 things really. Going back to domestic abuse, I think we were told there had to be a strategy in place by January. As far as I understand, we haven't had a domestic abuse strategy since 2020, and since then there's been new legislation. The council's committed to becoming a white-driven authority. It's a very bad place to be, to not have any strategy to deal with an issue which will affect, we know, 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 women in the course of their lifetime. So thousands of women this year will be affected by it, and some will die in the county as a result of domestic abuse, and some men will be affected by it as well. So I would urge us to not wait for the strategy, but surely we can get involvement in the preparation of that strategy, and somebody can come to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, tell us what they're working on at the moment, what the issues are they're faced with, what the impact of the new legislation is, and we can review that before the strategy is actually published. We don't have to wait for the strategy to be published. Yeah, the last bit I'd like us to do some work on is waste minimisation, because we've rolled out, the wheel bins, which is great, but there is a problem that we are, I think, the 4th or 5th highest in the country in terms of waste arisings, and we do need to address that before we're put under a lot more pressure from government, because we're sitting as a major outlier in terms of the amount of household waste we are collecting. So again, it's just, and then there's been some stuff over Twitter I've noticed in the last month or two from the council. So it's not that we don't do anything in this field, we just haven't got a strategy. We did have a strategy back in 2010, but that's just when we need to look at that area of waste minimisation. What can the council do? And then thirdly, there's one that's been brought to my attention by somebody who was very disgruntled to find that the leisure centres run by Shropshire Council have a differential pricing structure. But you can join one and use them all. So this individual was aghast to find out that he paid £35 a month to join a leisure centre in Oswestry, was entitled to use a leisure centre in Oswestry and in Shrewsbury and in various other places, but he could have got to the same result by paying £25 a month and ticking the box Shrewsbury rather than Oswestry, because it doesn't matter where you live. And he thought this was outrageous, that just by ticking one box he was being charged £10 a month more, and points out to me that actually Oswestry, North Shropshire generally, has much higher levels of limited long-term illness and disability than Shropshire as a whole. The only answer I've had back from that is, well, it's a higher facility, but if you look back in time, of course, it wasn't Shropshire Council that built Oswestry Leisure Centre, it was the people of Oswestry through Oswestry Borough Council who paid for that centre to be built. So I think it just needs looking at as to whether we really got the pricing structure right, because it just seems crazy that somebody can tick one box, get the same amount for £25, or tick another box, get the same amount and pay £35 a month, which is a considerable sum of money over the course of a year. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. I think there's going to be a few more thrown in.
I've been keeping track of the domestic abuse strategy and periodically checking in with the officers. I think I was initially under the impression that our funding was dependent on that strategy, and that doesn't actually appear to be the case. I think we still get the funding. I think there's a statutory duty to produce the strategy, right, but there's no time scale in which to produce that. I understand that we have now recruited an officer to write that strategy, so we'll ramp up now. So I think probably when it might be an idea to bring that at a time when the officers have actually got something to share with you. So I'll keep on top of it and I'll keep updating with you. And then as soon as there's something useful, not too late, not too early, of course, I'll work with Lil to bring on the new officer to bring that for you.
So I think, would that be something helpful when we get to sort of work programme agendas and so on? Maybe if we build something in of agreed recommendations or actions we've got outstanding, and then that's a straightforward way for us. We don't have to discuss them at every meeting, but we've got that clear overview of where we're outstanding. Okay, David?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And just one small point. I noticed in Daniel's presentation that the committee is responsible for kind of crime, sort of overviewing crime. I think that was one of the topics. And one of the things that's coming up in my board at the moment is drug-related activity, which is causing social problems. And I wondered whether there was any way we could be investigating in terms of what the council can do to minimise and to help the police and other organisations who are trying to deal with drug-related issues, which is quite, I find quite a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, throw that. I think, as I say, I think probably what we should look at is substitutes and members, bringing forward some of the ideas, and so I'm guessing the long list will be quite long that we have to sort out here, but yeah, if we can look at that and then pull together a meeting really to get some focus, at least for that 12-month period of what we're looking at, bring that in. Does that make sense, Daniel? And then you've got a clear sort of direction of travel before the next one. Okay. Are there any other thoughts from members what they'd on this? No. Okay. In that case, we've currently got the date of the next meeting set as the 20th of July. Thank you very much for attending today. Thank you to the members of the Place Committee, and Jeff and Joyce and others, and Roy that joined us for the briefing. And obviously, as the work goes forward on this, I'll liaise with the other scrutiny chairs, make sure we're sending it to the right place. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Robert.